All right, so right now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you an real-time example of Spring events, right? So basically, we have learned what is Spring events, how to use publishers, listeners, those things, how to create our custom events. We learned about those things. Right now, we'll see some examples how can we use that in our project, or how basically Spring events used in our real-time projects, right? So there can be various different scenario, but one scenario is I'm gonna show you right now. That's gonna be the using the Spring event with the Spring security, right? So what we'll be doing today, we'll be logging the user authentication details. Imagine someone is trying to log in to your system. Okay, you have given them a login screen and they are trying to log into your application, and you have to log the user details, right? Okay, let's say Akhil is trying to log in. I want to know what Akhil's IP address is, and what is his username, and what is his IP address, what is his session ID, okay, and why I want to log his information. So maybe I can track, if he is trying to do authentication with my system, he's trying to log into my system, but multiple times he's giving the bad username or bad password. Let's say he's giving the right username but the wrong password for multiple times. Maybe I can lock his user account. Maybe someone is trying to do a fraud, or maybe it is a brute force attack, right? So maybe I can do a whole lot of things. But the first thing that I'm going to do here is going to be very, very simple. I want to log his user authentication details, his IP address, his session ID, and his username when he's trying to log in. I want to have that in my system. Okay, like the logging in the user authentication details into your console. Okay, and later also we'll persist this information into a real-time database. Okay, so just remember one thing. Whenever you try to log in, using Spring Security, right? You know that you have the Spring Security login screen. Whenever you try to log in something, the Spring Security by default fire an authentication event called authentication success event. This is an event the Spring Security fire whenever the user login is successful. Let's say Akhil is trying to log in. Once he successfully logged into my system, the Spring Security will fire an event that's called an authentication success event, and we have to capture this event, and from this event we'll get the whole different things that is related to his login, like his IP, like his session ID, like his username, and all his details. Okay, so we'll be using this event today, authentication success event. So basically, whenever you try to log in and you just enter a bad credential, the Spring Security will throw an exception, and also it also publishes an event. And similarly, whenever you try to log in and the login is success, Spring Security again will publish an event called authentication success event. So I can just track a whole different things using this event. Okay, so to do this, or to perform the things that I have told you, we have to do obviously a few things. First of all, we'll be creating a Spring Boot project today, and the people who are watching this video as a part of the free course or the free Spring Security course, or the people who are watching this from one of my paid course, but you are watching this video, make sure that the same thing, whatever I'm going to do today, you can do that in your Spring MVC application as well, right? I'm just going to use Spring Boot today just because I want to set up things quickly, and I just want to focus on the thing which I supposed to teach here, which is Spring events. But whatever I'm going to do here is exactly applied to your Spring MVC as well. You can do the exact same thing right there. Okay, so I'll be creating a Spring Boot project. Then I'll obviously set up some application users. I may have different users in my system, Avilash, let's say Yash, Ravi, Akhil, right? I'll be setting up those users to my application. And obviously that we can set up users in Spring Security by using a in-memory authentication, or we can store the data inside the database and we can load them up, and various things, various aspects of Spring Security we have already covered in our earlier sessions. And once we set up some users, we'll create a table called customer. Okay, because basically for my system, I want to load the data, load the user details, like, from a database, right? So I'll create a customer table. I'll store all my user details, like his password, username, email, country, his roles, the complete user details, and some extra, fields which is related to the customer. Everything I'll be storing it within a table called customer. So I'll be just creating a table called customer, and I'll be storing all my customer details, right from the username to password to the customer country to his role and everything. I'll be stored everything inside a table called customer. Okay. And the next thing here is that whenever that customer is trying to log in, right, giving his credentials, I'll be just logging his IP address and his username. First of all, this is the first task that I'll be doing for this application. And the next thing, once I'm able to log those informations, I'll also make sure that I'll be creating a table called, let's say, login success or something. And whoever the customer who is trying to log into my system, for all the login success event, I'm going to store the name, IP, login time of that particular customer to my database. Okay. First, let me do this. And once I'm able to do this, then obviously I can also lock user out. I can implement a user lockout, obviously, if I have a hold to all these things, based on the failure attempts. Let's say if the user is not able to log in for two times or three times or four times, if it's not able to successfully log in, maybe I can also lock his user account out. Okay, so maybe this is making sense. Okay, so that's it. So right now let's go back to our STS, and let's try to implement the same thing. And today I'm going to do the logging, and tomorrow I'm going to do the persisting, and we'll implement the user lockout. And also we'll make sure once we lock out an user after 30 minutes or 40 minutes, the user account will be automatically unlocked and he'll be able to log in again, right? But first, let's start it from absolute scratch. Okay, so till now the idea is clear, what we are trying to do here, what we are supposed to do here. Can I just hear yes, no? Are you okay what I'm going to do right now?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's create a simple project. Let's create a Spring Starter project and connecting to the web service and building. Okay. All right. So the the name of this application is going to be Spring Security, let's say user lockout, because this is our whole purpose, to protect our user from a brute force attack. Okay, when I say brute force attack, that does mean that somebody is trying to use a bot or something, and they're going to try out different password with your username. And if the username and password matches, obviously they will unlock your account, they will change the password, and obviously your account will be compromised. So we'll make sure that if multiple number of bad attempts is happening over a particular user, we can lock it out. But that's our last goal. But let's start it from scratch, as I said. So this is going to be my application name, and I want to create a jar. I want to create a var, because I'll be using JSP for my web layer, because not sure that if I have dots timely for something else in my other batches. Maybe this video is going to be watched by a whole different people. Maybe I'll just go with JSP, because I know that JSP is pretty common and most of you should know about it. So that's why I'm just making the packaging as var, because I need a web app folder. And the next thing is that the group ID is going to be com.seleniumexpress.user lockout, and the version is going to be 0.001. Artifact is there, and also let me change the package name to this, and do a dot. There we go. Do a next, and I want few things here. First of all, I want to I want Spring Wave. So Spring Wave I want. Obviously I want DevTools, I want Spring Security. I don't want to use MySQL driver. By the end of the video, once everything is done, I want to point my application to MySQL. For now, let's go with a S2 database, because we'll be doing a lot of testing, and S2 database will be pretty much easy to use. So let's go with S2. And I don't want to use Timeleaf or anything else. Spring Boot DevTools, security. Yeah, this looks good. So right now I have few dependencies selected: Spring Web, Spring Security, S2 Database, and Spring Boot DevTools. I think this is gonna be pretty much enough. Okay, so let me do a next. And I'll do a finish. Let it create a project. And I got my project here. Let me create all the unrelated project.
Hello.
Yes.
What about work with JSP?
For JSP, I'll just copy paste the jar. I'll just copy paste the dependency, Felix. Right point. Maybe I'll go to my Maven repository right now, and let me go to an incognito window. Let me go to Maven repo, and right there I'll go to the Maven repo, and I'll go for a JSP. Let's say Tomcat Jasper. Do a search. And I'll go for Tomcat Embed Jasper, and I'll go for one of the recent version. I'll copy this. I'll go back to my pom.xml, and I'll paste it just right here. Let's say right over here. Control V, Control A, Control Shift F, and remove the version from here, because the version anyhow will be managed by my parent starter, which is just right here. Okay, Control S. So this is it, I believe, right? So I'm all set with my application dependency, right? So the next thing that we'll be doing here is maybe I will go to my source main Java, okay? And let's start our application and let's see everything is working okay or not. So right now we also have Spring Security in our class path. So what I believe that, Spring Security will be by default activated. And obviously I should get a default user called user, and this is going to be the default password for my Spring Security user. That Spring Security has been created for me, but I don't want any default kind of thing here. I want to set up my users by myself. So maybe what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a new class under a package called user lockout.securityconfig, and right over here I'll create a new class called let's say security config. Okay, so my package name, class name, both are same. That's fine. Do a finish and go to the Spring Security config package and open the class that you have just created. And right over here, how to create a Spring Security filter chain. What I have to do here, anybody remember for this class? If I want to, first of all, if I want to create a filter chain, what I have to do? Anybody remember the annotation?
Enable security.
Enable web, correct. Enable web security. And also if I want to set up some users for my application, I have to override a configure method. Anybody remember that configure method present inside which class or which abstract class? Anybody remember? Yes?
Web security configure adapter.
Okay. Web security configure adapter. And right over here, if I want to set up some users, I have to override the method which takes the authentication manager builder as a parameter. So for our manager, what I'm going to do, someone is to mute. With our authentication manager builder, what I'm going to do auth dot, let's first set up a in-memory authentication, then we'll change it to JDBC authentication. So in-memory authentication, then with user, and the user is going to be, let's say, Avi, and then just do a password. The password is going to be Avi123, and then I'm going to set off a role, and the role is going to be, let's say, admin. And of course, I am also going to set off the password encoder. So the password encoder is, let's use a very basic and plain password encoder, which is going to be our no password encoder. And obviously this is going to be a singleton class, so I have to use .get instance to get the instance of the password encoder. So everything is looking good so far. and I am just going to start my application. So I'll go to Spring Security User Lockout and start my application, and let's see that whether I'm able to log in to my system. Let's say, can I go to here to localhost 8080, do enter, and obviously it is popping in a login screen. So it's going to be OV123, enter. Obviously I'm logged in. Cool. Okay, so things are working fine. So I have a very basic user setup here. That's absolutely fine. Maybe later I'm going to change it to JDBC authentication once I have a setup ready. But one more thing I want to verify here, my S2 console. Whether my S2 console, where is my S2 console? Right now my S2 console is activated or it's not activated. So I am not seeing anything for my S2 in the log. Okay, so can I do one thing? Can I go to my pom.xml? And in my pom.xml, let me verify whether I have S2 activated. Yeah, S2 is there. So obviously it should run with the, with the default console path. Let me try that. / s2 - console. Enter. Yeah, there you go. That's my S2 console URL. And obviously right now, let me just set up a valid a schema name for my S2 console, right? So what I'm gonna do, okay, so let me go to my application. Let me go to my application.properties file, and right over here, let me give a let's say the URL, right? Let me create a valid URL for my S2. So this is going to be my spring.datasource.url, and my database name is going to be whatever. Let me copy that URL, whatever the default URL that I have. And now I want to create a new database called user lockout, Control S, and the default username and password is going to be obviously SA, and the default password is going to be null, as you guys know. So right now, if I want to do a test connection, obviously it's not there. So right now, let me do one thing. The default database name is going to be user lockout. Copy that name, Control C, go back to here, paste it over here, and I want to do a test connection. So what is happening? 403 forbidden. Okay, because we have Spring Security set off right now activated with our application, and obviously right now we are not able to log into our system, because whenever this URL is getting fired, obviously this URL, this particular path, /s2 - console -test.do, obviously this is protected by my Spring Security. So maybe I have to ignore it. And for that, you can just do ant matchers, and you can permit this particular URL path by making a permit all. Or the best way to do that, what we can do, we can go to our application security config one more time. Okay, and right over here we have to override one more method. And one way is obviously you can override the method which takes HTTP as a parameter, and right over here you can just do http.authorize request dot any request, and I want to authorize any request. I'll just change it in a minute, but for now any request, and I want to make them authenticated. All the requests will be authenticated, and I can authenticate everything by using a form login or the basic auth, HTTP basic. Okay, and now what I can do, I don't want to authenticate any request. First of all, I want to use a ant matchers, and I can basically say that this path, I want to give permission for everyone. I can just do copy and just paste over here and /*. That means after S2 console there can be anything, and for all this path I want to permit all these requests. So I will be using permit all. This is one way to do it, or the best way to do it over here, instead of using the configure method which takes a HTTP security as a parameter, instead of that, for now, can I comment this out? I can use one more approach. I think this is one of the best approach to do this. Go to override this particular method called configure, which takes a web security as a parameter. Okay, and right over here, you guys can do what? You guys can just do wave dot ignore or ignoring, and you can see this ignoring is allow adding a request matcher, just like your MBC matcher or ant matchers or anything. And if you're going to do that, and this will not be available to the HTTP servlet request that matches, and obviously those things will be ignored, the instances that Spring Security should ignore, right? So maybe I'll just go with the ignoring method, and here with this ignoring, as I have told you, I can use the ant matcher or any request matcher, and here obviously I'm going to take that particular path again, Control C, and paste it over here, and there you go. Okay, and for here I'm saying that I'm going to ignore this particular thing. Okay, so I think this is it. This is going to work fine. Let's do a Control S. It is going to restart my application. I will go to over here and I'll go back. I'll do a refresh, and now my URL for this application is user lockout. This is my database name. Control C, paste it over here. SA is going to be my default username, and default password is going to be empty. You can obviously override that, and you know how to do that. But whenever I do test connection, it's saying that either pre-create it or allow the remote database creation. Database is not found, either pre-create it or allow the remote database creation. But one thing that it is allowing to, this URL, I'm able to navigate to this URL right now, but the thing is that when
your voice is again breaking.
All right, now it's good. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so so right now let's do the next thing. So it is saying that this database is not found, either pre-create it or allow the remote database creation. All right, one thing I want to see here, maybe there you go. I do not have Spring Data JPA in my class path. The dependency for Spring Data JPA is not there in my class path. So maybe let me add the Spring Data JPA to my application. So Spring Data JPA, next, I'm gonna update the POM. I'll do a finish, and let me stop this and let me start this application again. Sorry, I just started it in test mode. Let me start the Spring Boot app again. And now a lot of things in my, there you go. So looks like the data JPA is in place and is creating the pool and everything, connection pool and everything. Is using a S2 dialect right now. Let me go back to my application. Let me go to the S2 console, and let me just do a refresh, and let's do a continue. The default username is going to be SA, password is going to be null. Do a test connection. Oh, it's the same thing. Can I do a update?
URL.
Yes.
URL.
URL.
URL you have changed.
URL I have
H2 database URL.
Okay, so it should be our user lockout DB. Okay, perfect. We will see that right now one more time, Savita. Just give me a moment. So I think I have just updated this particular project. Let me restart it and I'll just check it again. Spring Boot app. Okay, so right now my application is started, and here this URL is going to be user lockout. Let me copy this and let me paste it just right over here. Control V, and I'll do test connection. Control V, test connection. Oh, there you go, man. Do enter, and I'm able to log into my S2 database. Perfect. I'm sorry, guys. I just keep that data API property right there. Okay. So now things are looking good. We are all set with our S2 database, and we have created our default URL. If you want to give a username and password, just go ahead and set up the username and the password. And obviously, you have to choose this property, the data source one, the data source username. You can just choose this one, give your username, and obviously create one more property and change it to, just make it spring.datasource.password and change the password of your data source. But for now, I'll be going with the default username and password, which is going to be SA and null for my, S2 database, which is perfect. Okay, so things are looking good. Next thing that I'm going to do here, I'm going to create an entity. So go to new and just create a new class. And I'm going to create a new entity. So I'm going to keep all my entity in a package called entity. And the class name for this is going to be, let's say, customer, because I want to create a customer table where I'll be setting off all my customer related data. Obviously, this is going to be an entity. So let me say entity. And obviously, this is going to be a table. And the table name, I'm going to say it as customers. Okay. And the name of the table is going to be customer. And I want to create few properties. First of all, obviously, private string customer name, or this is the customer entity, or let me say name. Okay, so this stands for the customer name. The next thing that I may store here is called private string, let's say country, and the next thing is going to be private string, or let's say email. The next thing is going to be private string username. This is going to be the customer username. I'm going to store everything in one file right now, one database right now. And the next one is going to be the password. The next one is going to be is the customer enabled. So Boolean is enabled. Okay. So these are these are the few things that I want to take over here. And maybe one more property I can take that's called, let's say, the created that. So private, let's say timestamp, and I want to know when this customer data has been created. So maybe I'm going to take timestamp here, which is coming from java.sql, and maybe I can do let's say created date. Okay, so that means when this customer record has been created. Okay, so this looks good. And right now I don't want to use add column before every column, every property that I have. That if I'm not going to use add column, by default the name of this property is going to be my column name. So one more thing, the first thing that I'm going to do here, I'm also going to create an ID. So private int ID, and this is going to be the ID for my customer. So obviously I'm going to write an ID. I'm going to write a generated value, and the generated value for this, I'm going to say it to the strategy is going to be identity, because I want my database to generate the ID value, because my database is going to take care to increment the sequence of my ID, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That stuff my database is going to manage, and I'm not going to manage that manually over here. Okay. Yes.
What about IP?
What about what Felix? IP. For IP, we will just have it inside a different, we will create a different entity, and the IP address will be maintaining inside a different entity, Felix. Okay, we will come back to that. Maybe first of all, let's go with the simple stuff just like this. Maybe later on, whenever we'll be start doing some complicated stuff, we'll be start creating the entity based on seeing our requirement. Okay, let's not blindly create something. Let's first create, let's first make it work, and then we will come to those IP and the things like that. Okay, and here one more thing I want to do, this created date. maybe okay, so maybe I'll just create the date by myself. If you want database to, if you want Hibernate to default the created date, then you can just you can either use a annotation here called creation timestamp. Okay, the creation timestamp will help you, it is by default going to create a timestamp which is in your server, and obviously for this column value the timestamp will be automatically inserted. But for now I won't be using this. I'll be manually inserting my time, my created date and time. And now let me create all the getters and setters for everything. So I'll go to source and I'll create the getters and setters. Okay, and I'll do select all and I'll do generate. Okay, and there you go. I think everything is looking good. So yeah, the things are looking good. So if I am going to do a Control S right now, and if I'm going to save this application.properties, and if I'm going to go to my S2 database, if I'm going to refresh it, I believe that I should have an entity created so far called customers. The customer entity has been created in my database. If I'm going to run this, obviously there is no data present over here. First of all, I need some default data to be present. So maybe I'll go to my source main resources and I'll be creating a new file. And this file is going to be my data.sql file. Sorry, the name of the file is going to be, right click, do a rename, refactor, rename, and the file name is going to be data.sql. And here I'm going to set off some of my default cost. Obviously I'm using a S2 database, so every time I'll restart my application I will lose the customer. So obviously I don't want to manually insert some customer here. If I'll be manually inserting the customer, once I stop my application and once I reload the things, the data will be going away from here because it's an in-memory database. So I want every time my application boots up, whenever I'll be starting my application, there is some row I want to insert. There is some data I want to insert to this particular table, which I will be using as a default customers to my application. Okay, let's create some insert query. Insert into customers. So what is my table name? Customers. Go to my data.sql, and this is my table name, and here I have to give my column names, all my column names. So what I'm gonna do for now, I don't want to type it manually. Maybe I will just get this screen wherever my STS is.
One question.
Yes.
So in application properties, we won't be writing that Spring JP Hibernate DDL auto create or update.
Yeah, because it is by default true. Okay, it's by default true right now. So by default set to auto. So not auto. By default set to create. Create.
Okay.
So it's creating the schema for me already, right? And I don't have to set up that particular property. But yeah, you can, maybe if you are using MySQL or something else, good point, Akhil. Maybe you can just do DDL auto and make it to create. Okay, maybe if you're using MySQL, this property you have to write, but I'm using an embedded database, so it's by default, creating the schema for me. So right now in the data.sql, I want to insert some data to this customer table. So I'll open this customer. I will just get rid of this particular query that I have here. So ID will be auto-generated. So I'll start with the country, copy that, paste it over here, comma, created that, copy that, paste over here, then do a comma. Then the next one is email. Email, I can type that in, email. So the next one is enabled, copy that. I have not given any column name, so by default my property name has been taken as the column name, but let me just copy paste whatever is required so that there won't be any typo, and I will be easily create few records. So paste it. So then the username, copy this and paste it over here. Okay, that's it. Now I will take this screen to somewhere else, and I will this is my Spring Boot, and I will take it to some other screen. Okay, make it full screen. Okay, so now the values I have to insert. So values, okay, and whatever the values for this. So for the country, let me create some customer right now. The country is going to be, let's say, India. Okay, and the created date, obviously I want to manually insert it, as I said. So that's going to be my current timestamp. So I'm going to say CURRENT, current timestamp. So that's a property. Okay, that's automatically going to take my my computer time and going to use that as a timestamp, right? So hopefully there is no typo. Current timestamp. Okay. So the next one is going to be the email. The email is going to be, let's say, avi@gmail.com. The next one is going to be is enabled. I'm going to either I can say true or false, but right now I think it's also support tiny int. So maybe I can take one as true, 0 as false. So obviously this user is an active user, so the is enabled is going to be 1, and the name is going to be, let's say, Abhilash, and the password is going to be, let's say, Avi123, and the username is going to be, let's say, Avi and Avi123 is the username and password. Let me do a Control S. So obviously I told you this particular problem. Right now what is happening whenever I'm running this application, so it is saying table customer is not found. So I told you in the latest version of Spring what is actually happening. It is trying to running the script, this particular data.sql script. It is running first, and obviously by the time the JPA is actually did not create the table for me. So either there are two solutions, either I can create a schema.sql file and I'll create the table manually, or I will just let my JPA create the table. And obviously my JPA is creating the table called customer, but by the time it is creating the customer table, before that this data.sql is getting run, and it is obviously not able to insert the data to the customer table because it is saying the customer table is not exist. So to fix this, I'll go to the application.properties and I'll just set up one more properties called defer data source initialization, and I'll say this to true, and this is going to do what? This is gonna activate the lazy stuff for me, and I think this is a different this is a different issue. It is saying current timestamp is not found in the data.sql right now. The current timestamp, is there any typo here? CURRENT, Control S. Now it is going to restart it. Looks like it is loaded perfectly. Right now the reason why I have activate the data source, the default data source initialization, because I want first JPA to create the table and then this data.sql to run. Okay, so once the table is created, then only we'll be able to insert the data. That's why I've just activated this particular property, and obviously this is a new property which has been added in the newer version of Spring Boot. Okay, so right now, obviously one more thing before I proceed, if anyone is watching this video, do not judge me like why I have why I'm mixing the stuff off, why I am letting JPA to create a particular table, and again I'm using data.sql to do the insertion. If you want, you always can create a schema.sql file if you want to manage the things by yourself. But I want to save time, so I want JPA to create the table for customer, and then obviously I'm running a data.sql file just to insert the data in my table. Okay, so right now we can go to our S2 console, and right over here I want to see whatever the commands that I have run previously. So obviously my server has restarted. That's fine. I can just run this again. Obviously the data is inserted, right? Is enabled is true, email is something, created that is there, country, ID, then the username and the password. Okay, and the name is Avilash. Looks good. So the next thing that I'll be doing over here, let me create few users. Maybe I'll just copy this, Control C, and paste it over here for a few times. Can I go back, Control B? Okay, and I just want to create few users. Maybe 2 or 3 I can create so that I can do some experimentation. while locking them out. So let's say another user I want to create, let's say abhip@gmail.com. The username is gonna be the name is going to be, let's say, abhipsa. The username for this, let's say abhip123, and the password, and let's say the username is going to be abhip, right? And one more user I want to create, let's say, let me create one more user. Let's say the username is, the name of the user is Akhil. Let's say the password is Akhil123. The username is going to be, let's say, Akhil. Okay, so I got 3 users over here. I'll do Control S. So it's going to create all these users for me, and then I can load this user off. So what I'm going to do right now, if I'm going to run this thing again, if I'm going to connect this, if I'm going to do a select start from, I got some user set up. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so already 8:56. Man, I have not done anything today. Okay, so anyhow, so users are right now set up. So things are looking good. Now let's do one thing. Let me just create quickly a JSP page because I want to secure that page. So I will be going to my source main web app, and here I will create a folder called views, and I will create a JSP file. So I'll just go here for JSP. I'll do a next, and the file name is gonna be, let's say dashboard. Let's say customer dashboard. Customer dashboard.jsp, customer-dashboard.jsp, and this is going to be my JSP file. Let's say you are seeing the customer dashboard, just creating a random page here. Okay, so I just got a dashboard. I mean, I just have a JSP page, and to access this JSP page, I have to create a controller. So let me go to over here. Let me create a controller. So it's going to be a class, and I want to put everything inside a controller package, and the name of the class is going to be let's say this controllers, and let's say this customer controller. Okay, and I'll do a finish. Let me quickly make it a controller, and then the next thing I'm going to do over here, I'm going to create a method, public string. It's going to be my handler method. Let's say show customer dashboard. Okay, I want to show the user my customer dashboard, and obviously the page name is going to be this one. Well, instead of putting it directly inside the web app folder, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to create a new folder, and obviously I have to put that inside a web-inf folder, and I want to create a new folder called view, and inside the view folder only I'll drag my JSP to here. I'll do OK, and this is my JSP page name. I can just do Control C, and I'll just go over here and I can say return, and I want to return this particular page. Obviously this JSP I won't be concatenating with this because I want to create my view resolver in the application.properties file. So here I just want to create the prefix and suffix. The prefix is going to be Spring MVC view.prefix, and this is going to be /web-inf/view, okay, / and the suffix is going to be .jsp. Okay, so obviously Spring Boot is going to create an view resolver with this configuration, because we are telling that where we are basically keeping our JSP file, and obviously that is inside the web-inf under view folder. Okay, things are looking good. So now let me go to my web app. Let me just hit localhost 8080, localhost 8080, and obviously it's going to ask me a login page. What is the URL? I think I have not created the URL. Let me go to the customer controller, and for this let me create a get mapping. So I'll just say get mapping, and let me create a mapping for this called / let's say dashboard. Okay, Control S, copy this URL, Control C this, And obviously by default this URL is secure. All my URLs are by default secure. You know that. Why all the URLs are by default secure? Can anybody tell me where is that configuration? I have not done any kind of configuration in my security config file. Here I have just have a wave. I have overridden this. I do not have this method overridden. Okay, and here I'm just setting up my users. Why I'm saying all my URLs are secured? Right now, if I'm gonna go over here, if I'm gonna hit this URL, Control B, do enter, obviously it is asking me to log in again. So how automatically it is getting secured? Anybody remember? Where is that configuration? Anyone?
Inside the main, they do have a default method.
Where?
Configure.
Inside where?
Inside configure adapter class, sir, there is one class, configure method, the default one.
Yes, that is going to be the configure, the one which takes the HTTP security. And of course, here only they're saying HTTP.authorized request, and they are securing any request, and they're making every request which is coming into a site authenticated. Okay, and obviously they're using a form login for normal login from a browser, and a HTTP basics if you in case hitting this URL from a REST web service or from a REST client like Postman or SOAP UI or something else. Perfect. So right now I got my login phase. So I have a default user called Avi123. Do enter, and obviously I'm right now seeing this particular customer. I'm just seeing the dashboard that I've just created. So things are looking good. So maybe we don't have much time today, but I want to do few more things before I wrap up. Can anybody help me? Right now I'm doing a in-memory authentication, right? And this is my username and password. Right now what I want in my database, if I'll go to my H2 console, here I got my users created. Let's say I want to log in with Akhil with his password Akhil123, then obviously I won't be able to do so. You know about that, right? If I'll be going to let's say if I'm gonna do a logout, and if I'm gonna do a logout, let's say if I'm gonna log in with Akhil and Akhil123, then obviously it is gonna say bad credential because I don't have an user created. And obviously I'm using a in-memory authentication just right over here, and this is only one user that I have. Right now I want to point my user loading stuff. I want to use a JDBC authentication, and I want to get the user from the database. Okay, from the database, from my S2 database, here I have my users, and I want to use this credential. And if I want to do so, how I'll be doing it and how many approaches are there? Anybody remember how I'll be loading the users from my database? I don't want to hardcode the users just like this anyhow. Anybody remember what is the approach for this? Anyone?
We can define being data source, and in that we can load our users, or we can go with the approach where we can simply override user details manager, load user by username method.
Load user by username method is there where?
In the user details
Service.
service, yeah, user details service. Yeah,
Yes,
user details.
correct. So inside the user detail service, we have the load user by username method. We can create our own class, implement this interface, then we can override this particular load user by username method, and we can basically load the user from the database. Or else for this user detail service, if I do Control T, we have a lot of different implementation. One is called in-memory, one is called JDBC user details manager. Inside JDBC user details manager, obviously, we have that particular method overridden. So if I'll go to load user by username method, so it is basically, you can see that, it has the load user by username method. And right over here, if I will be looking into this, it is just doing a JDBC template.query. It is making a query. It is basically running this query. Okay. And this is being set here. If I'll be going to here, this is the query it is running, and it is going to get your user details from your table called users, because JDBC user details manager, as discussed in the previous courses, it is basically look for the username, password, and enabled column. And these things, it looks inside a table called users. But right now I want to use my custom schema. If I want to use my custom schema, then how I'll be doing it? Anybody remember? This is the default query, right? I want to override this query because by default it is gonna load the user from the users table, right? But I don't want to load the users from the users table. I want to load the users from the customers table, right? So if I want to do that, if I don't want to create a different user detail service by implementing the interface called user details interface, I don't want to override this particular method. I want to still use the JDBC user details manager. I don't want to use in-memory user details, in-memory authentication. With this authentication manager builder, which is my authentication manager, with this I want to create a JDBC authentication. And obviously this JDBC authentication method, if you remember, by default internally it is using your JDBC user details manager class. Okay, so right now here I am inside the JDBC user details manager class, and obviously I have the load user by username method just right here. Can I do a control O, load user by username? This method I want to use to load my users whenever I'm doing a sign-in. Now what I want, whenever I want to do a login by giving my username and credential, this load user by username query is going to take the username of the person that I'm trying to log in with, and it is going to do a query to my database by using this query. Okay, it is going to get the data from the database, but only the problem is that this query, which has been set right here, is basically looking into the users table. So I want to change it to the customer table. So for that, what I'm going to do, maybe for now, I'm not going to create any, user detail service, and let me use the default Spring Security stuff. So for that, what I'm going to do, first of all, I need a data source. So from which table I want to load the data. So obviously I have given my data source information in my application.properties file right over here. My URL is there, and as I said, my default username and password has been set to null, and the default user is SA, right? So those information I'll be using. So maybe I can simply just do data source, and which comes from SQL and data source. I really don't need to create any bean here because I'm using Spring Boot and data source is auto configured. So I can just directly auto where it, and this is my data source, and here I can say data source. So right now I'm telling here that I want to load my users from this data source, and in this data source obviously I have my table defined, which is user lockout, and inside the user lockout I have the customer table. But if I'm going to run this, do you think it is going to work? If I'm going to do Control S, you will see that I'll have a problem. Right now my server has been started. If I will go to my screen, and let's say I am going with an user called Akhil, and Akhil123, do enter, and obviously right now it is giving me a problem. Can anybody understand the issue by reading it right over here? What it is trying to do? We have a bad SQL grammar exception. It is saying that select username password enabled with username something, and right now it is saying that it is not able to run this particular query because this is the error code. What I believe that user table is not exist. So you can see the table users is not found in SQL statement, because by default it is running that query that I have just shown you, and that's the default query. But in our case we have a different table, okay? And our table name is customer, so we have to make sure whatever they are doing in that particular maybe if I'll go back, if whatever they are doing in the JDBC authentication, we have to do the same thing. So if I'll be going to the user details manager, and if I'll be going to the load user by username method, and right over here they are running this query, JDBC template.query, and with this query user by username query, I can just simply copy that query, and I have to customize that query by my own. Okay, so let me go to my DB, my S2 console, and right over here I want to find out three things. As I have told you, what are the three things I need? I need, let's say, customers C, and I'll say C dot, I think I want to get the username first, so C dot username, then comma C dot password, and comma C dot enabled. is enabled. Okay, so I want to find this where the username, okay, is going to be something. Let's say for now I want to test with the username called Akhil. Okay, and I'm going to run this query. Do it connect again. Well, that is gone. Okay, nothing is there. Okay, select from customer. So now if I'm going to run this, okay, I'm getting this particular thing, which is perfect. These are the three things my these are the three things my Spring Security will be needing just to load this particular user from the database. It will just check whether this user is enabled or not. If it is true, then it is going to load this data. So I'll be going to be my application, and once I go to my application, right over here, I will just change the query. That's going to be user by username query. Where is that? Users by username query, and that query I can just do copy paste this right over here. And obviously this username can be anything, whatever I'm trying to log in with. So I'm going to give question mark, and by default right now Spring Security is going to use this query. I mean my JDBC user details manager is going to use this query to get the customer's data from the database, and based on the username, password, and enabled configured in my database, it is going to authenticate the user. And one more thing I have to configure here, that's the user role. So I'll just need to configure that as well, and that is called authorities by username query. And right over here, what I have to do, I have to let's say get here username and the user role. So user role is what? Where is my roles? Hey, did I have roles defined here? I don't have any roles here. Roles column. Well, I have to have that. So maybe I will go to my entity called customer, and right over here I will just create one more property called private string. For now, let me go with a single role called string role. Imagine that one user will have one role. So we will configure this later. We'll create a different table for roles. I've created a getter and setter for this role. And also I'll make sure one more thing. I will go to the data.sql, and right over there, I need to insert one more value called role. And let's say for Avi, the role is admin. Okay. And I'll do the same thing. I'll copy this and paste it for the three different query that I have. Role, and also I'll paste this, copy this value and paste it just right over here. Control V and Control V. Okay, let me make this guy a user and make this guy an user. Control S. Okay, so now let me go to my Google Chrome. Let me copy this query to be safe. Let me reload the application. I'll do continue. I'll just connect to my database. I'll go to the customer table, and now I have a role over here. Now I want to find the role, the username, and the customer username and role. I want to find roles, right? Where the username is something. Let's say if I'm running this query, I'm getting the data over here. Spring Security will be just needing these two things. Just copy that. Go to your application wherever you have it. Okay, go back to your security config file, and right over here, okay, the role I will be pasting over here. Okay, and let me just make it question mark, because this can be any person. This can be dynamic, right? So now I feel that this is it, and right now we'll be able to get our customer details, okay, from the database. We can able to load the data from our custom schema. So if I'll be going to my application, where is that login screen that I did have? Right over here. If I'll go to my sign in, now if I'll log in with Akhil, and Akhil 123, enter, I'm logged in. Okay, and if I'm gonna do dashboard, I'm able to see the screen, right? So I'm able to successfully log in by using the credential that I have in the database. Maybe I'll go to, let's say, can I see the command? Do I connect? Can I click on customers, run? Well, I want to log in with, let's say, Abhipsa, and his username is Abhip and password is Abhip123. So let me go over here. Let's say Abhip and Abhip123, enter, and I'm logged in, and I'm gonna do dashboard, and there you go. Right, I'm able to log into my dashboard. Guys, I want to take 10 more minutes to show you that what we call that, the how to basically, right now we are authenticating something, right? We are authenticating with I'm trying to log in with Akhil, or I'm trying to log in with Abhipsa, or I'm logging with Abhilash, right? Whenever these people are logging in, that is by default a authentication event will be triggered. I want to configure that, because so far whatever I have done, I'm just setting it up, and I'm sure that if you have previously attended the session, you should have pretty much aware about this, and you should have bored, because I've taken time to configure all these things. So can we have 10 minutes more so that I can set you up? I can just set off the event for this so that we can track and valid authentication. Can I take 10 minutes more? Can I?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let's just set it off, and maybe from tomorrow onwards, okay, we will be going into the things that you are actually looking for. Okay, because guys, I don't really know who is gonna watch this video. I don't want to say that, okay, do like this or do like that, and the setup will happen. I don't want to code this by myself before the class. If I would have done that, maybe you guys will understand, but someone who is not familiar with Spring Boot or something, they won't be able to understand this thing. So it was important to code it from the scratch. So right now we are all set with our application. Let's do a Control-Shift-O and remove all the unnecessary imports. So right now the thing is that I'm able to log in with some user. Okay, so let's say right now the requirement here is, if someone is trying to log in, okay, let's say Avi123, when this guy is trying to log in, I want his information to be logged, okay, in my console. Okay, if I'll be able to log his information in my console, then obviously I'll be able to persist his information in my database, right? So let's first try to log his information. Okay, and if I want to log it, as I have told you previously, whenever we when we try to log in, we can log into our system, as I have told you, by using an OTP, or by using an username and password, by using our face cam, by using our thumb impression. We can use different kind of authentication provider to authenticate ourselves. And every time the authentication provider is authenticate someone, is publish an event, okay? And we need to capture that event. And also I have told you, let me right now close all the things. I don't need all these things. Okay, anybody remember whenever I use let's say if I'll do a logout, okay, whenever I use a form-based authentication, which is the filter which is by default gets used, anybody remember? What is the filter gets used whenever?
Password authentication filter.
Perfect, okay, yeah. The filter name is username password authentication filter, okay? And I told you that inside the filter, we have a method called attempt authentication, which basically takes the username and password information from the, you can see that it is obtaining the username and password, whatever the things that you are, giving right over here in the form, those things it is obtaining from the request, and with this username and password, it is creating a new username password authentication token and sending this authentication request to the authentication manager. Then authentication manager will send this authentication request to the provider, and the provider will validate that particular thing, and it will create a valid authentication object for us. And who is basically calling this attempt authentication? If you're gonna see here in your abstract authentication processing filter, you know that whenever we create filters, we have a doFilter method. And inside that doFilter method, it is basically creating that attempt authentication, just right over here, whatever the method our filter has. this particular method, attempt authentication, is getting called just right here. And you can see once the authentication is done, if you're gonna go to the down, whenever it is creating a successful authentication, it is actually publishing an event. Okay, and that's called an interactive authentication event. Success event. It is basically publishing an event, and this event also we can listen to this, okay, by creating a listener. So there are so many things are happening behind the hood, and I don't want to get into this, and I don't want to open all these classes. I don't want to confuse you for nothing. Even though if you don't understand this, that is fine. But just remember that whenever we're creating a successful authentication, basically an event is getting triggered, okay, and maybe we'll go deeper and we'll learn about that, and we'll see different things where that authentication event is getting triggered behind the scene. But right now you just trust me, because I'm going to say you one thing, that whenever if someone is trying to authenticate himself, there is an event getting triggered. That event name is authentication success event. Authentication success event is something which is getting triggered whenever you are trying to log in, and that event you can track. Okay, where that event is getting triggered, I'm going to show you in future. But for now, let's do one thing. Let me go to my package explorer, and here I can create a listener. Okay, and obviously if someone is just found this video randomly in my website and or in my YouTube channel, just make sure that you should know about eventing and how to listen to an event, and also those videos are available for free. You can check those videos out before you watching this particular things right now, whatever I'm going to do. Because right now I'm going to set off an listener, okay, an event listener. And for this, I'm going to do what? I'm going to do lockout dot, let me set up some listeners. So listeners, and I want to set off a authentication success, okay, authentication success listener. Copy this, paste it over here, and this is my event name or listener name. Okay, so I want to create a listener, and this listener is going to listen to an event when your authentication is successful. Well, if you don't know about event and listener pretty much, maybe for the concept you can refer those videos. If you don't want to, then just see that whenever you are creating a listener, make sure that this is going to be a part of your Spring application context. So you have to make it a component so that this listener will be registered with your application context. And the next thing that you have to do, you have to create a method. Let's say public void, let's say start or start listening, or I'm just writing start over here. And obviously the start method is going to listen to an event, and that event name is authentication success event. This is the one, authentication success event, then event. Okay, so now whenever some successful login happen, this particular method is going to be executed, and this method is always going to listen to a authentication success event. So as I said, whenever he's trying to log in, whenever he does a sign in, so basically an event will be fired. That's going to be an authentication success event. And whenever someone successfully logged in, this event will be triggered, and I have to just listen to that. And I can do that by writing a event listener. Okay, and what I can do for now, I can just simply log this event. Let's say sysout, and let's say event, and I can say sysout, and I can say login. Okay, login. Okay, to Control S. So right now I have an event listener, which is going to listen to an event called authentication success event, and this event will be basically the type of authentication that you are using. Obviously I'm using a form-based authentication right now, so as Akhil said, by default a filter will be used, and that filter name is username password authentication filter. And you know that in the username password authentication filter, what kind of object we use behind the scene. That is basically our username password authentication token, which is a type of your authentication, right? That is one of the authentication types. So if you remember, you have an interface called authentication, and the authentication interface is basically going to help you to track the user details. For an example, what are the authorities a particular user has, what is the password of a particular user, what is the details, get details. I'll tell you, this detail will tell you the IP. Okay, this is what you are asking, Felix. If you want to understand the IP of a particular user, IP address of a particular user, the certificate serial number, the J session ID, the session ID which has been authenticated. If you want to have those things, you can get those things by using this get details method. Okay, get principal is obviously going to get you the username of the user. Is authenticated is going to tell you, like, you know, if the user is authenticated or not. And set authenticated, if you want to set the authentication to true or false based on your need, you can do that by using this particular method, right? So right now,
username password authentication token is kind of an authentication object, right?
Yes, it's kind of an authentication object. If you're going to go to this authentication success event, you can see right now the parameter that we have over here, we are going to get an authentication object. And as I have told you, if you're going to control T on this authentication, this is an interface. I have just shown you that authentication is an interface, and the implementation, the default implementation that we have for this is going to be username password authentication token, which is for our form based authentication. But if you're using a OTP based authentication, maybe this authentication object will hold a OTP authentication token. If you are using thumb impression, it's going to be holding a thumb impression authentication token. But for now, it is going to be holding a username password authentication token, because whenever you're going to log in over here, Spring is going to create an authentication token or authentication object behind the scene. And that authentication object, it will be creating by going to the username password authentication filter, as I have told you. And in the username password authentication filter, if you're going to see the attempt authentication method, you can see that the token that we are creating is the username password authentication token, and this auth result will be right now sent to the manager, then the provider, and the provider will validate that token and will be get back to you. And the attempt authentication token will return an authentication object, which is a type of username password authentication token, and that object will be there inside your session or inside your security context holder. Okay, so I'm sure whenever you're going to put a breakpoint over here, and if I'm going to activate all my breakpoints, can I first of all remove all the breakpoints if I have any? So I will go to here. Okay, I have the breakpoint only in the authentication success. What is that? Authentication success event. Only one breakpoint I have. Perfect. So let me switch back to the Java perspective, and let me activate the breakpoint. Now I have one breakpoint over here, and okay. So I don't have to put a breakpoint over here. Sorry. Let me go there and put a breakpoint in my own class. Okay. So if the listener is listening to the event called application authentication success event, then obviously I'll have that object just right over here, which is going to be an authentication object. And right now we are using a form based authentication. So this event will have a hold of an authentication token, and that authentication object is going to be username password authentication object. So let's see that. First of all, let's run it without debugging. Okay. So let's see. I'm gonna log in with Akhil, and the password of Akhil is Akhil123, enter, and I'm logged in. Let's go there and just see that in the console. Okay, now it is saying login. Okay, I'm able to log in. That means this listener is get called whenever this event get fired, and this event will be fired whenever there is a successful login. And you can see the authentication success event. And this object, okay, this event only I'm printing over here. And this object is internally is holding an authentication token or authentication object. If I'm going to click over here, this object is internally having an authentication object, and that the authentication type that we have used over here is a username password authentication token, right? And obviously you'll have a principal, and the principal will contain the user object right now. And right now by default the username is Akhil, password is obviously anyhow protected, the enabled is true, and all the properties are set up to true by default. And if you're gonna see the granted authority, he is an user, and obviously the details I told you, right? The details in the authentication object, if I'll go to this authentication object, I told you inside the authentication we also have something called get details, which is by default give you an object, and that object is getting set by Spring Security, and the object by default we are getting here is called web authentication details, and that's my remote ID. I'm running this application from my local host, so this is the 0:0:0:0:1. But if you have used it in, if you have hosted your application inside a different server, the actual IP of that user will be getting over here. This is the session ID with what I have authenticated with, and this is my granted authorities. Okay, so the thing is that I'm able to log this to information. Okay, this to information just right over here. So if you're gonna log further, if you're gonna come over to your listener, and if you're gonna put a breakpoint here in the line number 14, if you're gonna stop your application, and if you're gonna start your application in debug mode, right click and start it in debug, you will see that, okay, it is gonna stop here whenever I'm gonna try to log in. Let's say over here in the URL, I'm gonna write logout of the application. Let me log in with Abhi123, enter. Okay, it's asking me to switch. Let me not switch. Okay, you can see that right now. Okay, this authentication, where I am. Okay, I also have a breakpoint here. Can I do a resume? Well, can I do a resume? Okay, cool. So now you see that your flow is here inside the listener because the authentication has been done perfectly. If you're gonna hover over here in the event, see the source. Okay, you understand why we have the source over here? See, now in the authentication event, this is an event. I told you how to create an event, right? So in the event, if you're gonna see here, this event is extends to abstract authentication event. If you're gonna go over here, it is extending to application event, right? I told you how to create an event in Spring by creating by extending to an abstract class called application event. And in the application event over here, it extends to an event object. And if you're gonna go over here, the root, obviously, it has an object source. Like, what is the source of that particular object? Right now, what is our authentication object? Now this source, if you're gonna come over here, close it, come to the main authentication object. So our authentication object is authentication success event, and this is having an authentication type, right? The authentication type will have a hold on this right over here. Now the current authentication type is we are doing a form based authentication. So the current authentication type is username password authentication token. So by default, this authentication, whatever we are getting, that object is getting set to the super, and the super again, and the see right over here, it is setting the source. So that's why the default property name is source, because if you go to the super class of this, see, they're setting the source, right? There is a default property name called source. There are a level of abstraction here, so don't worry about it. If you can open this class and can see this particular detail. But now if I'll come back to my own class, which is this one, where is that class? Okay, here, this is my listener that I have created, right? Now this is the event I'll be getting, and with that event right now, the source for that event is username password authentication token. By default, inside the authentication success event, we have this constructor which has the authentication object, and that authentication is getting set. Okay, getting set, and it's gonna be set to the super class, and that's we really don't care about. Forget about this. The variable of that particular name is going to be source, and the source is right now username password authentication token. Right now, if we're going to open this up, right, so you can see the authorities are there, and there is the details, and this detail is set to web authentication details. And if you're going to open this up, you have your remote IP address and also the session ID of the user which he has authenticated with. And also, that principal the principle is basically whenever you are loading your users, right? So I told you, right, where you are loading your users, go to Control-Shift-T, go to Spring Security config file. Can I do a Control-Shift-R and go to Spring Security, what is that, config file or something, security config. Okay, so whenever you are loading your users by running this query, right, by default I told you in the this particular method by default is going to use JDBC user details manager. Okay, and here we have a load user by username method, and that load username by username method is going to get you what, a user details object, right, a list of user details. Obviously it will not be a list. Obviously whenever you are trying to load a particular user, obviously one user will be returned, right? Let's say I want to log in with Akhil, then obviously I will have only one username called Akhil inside my database. Always my username will be unique in my database. So obviously it is saying here list of user details, but you know that this list of user details will only get you only one user detail. Okay, and if you're going to go to this user details, I told you this is one way to store users in your Spring Security. The way you store users is defined by the user details, and this is similarly same as the authentication object, where you will get the authorities like the roles of the user, the password of the user, the username of the user, whether the user account is expired, whether the user account is logged, whether the user credentials are expired, whether the user is enabled or not. All this information will get in the user details object. And the user details basic implementation is, anybody remember? What is the default implementation of Spring Security of user details? Anybody remember? Anyone else who remember the default implementation of the user details?
User detail service.
Oh, user detail service is a different thing. I am just telling about how the user details default implementation in Spring Security. Users, right? You guys don't remember? You have a user class in Spring Security, which basically implements all these things. Now you remember it, in your Spring Security you have studied, right? You have the user details, the basic, the default class that Spring Security Framework is used is a user class, and the user class implements the user details. And obviously right now basically the way we build users, right? I mean the way we build users, we use the default user class. I have told you in your Spring Security course. Maybe if you guys remember, the user is the class. Maybe you remember like user.with username with password with role.build, and it used to get you the user object back. You remember? Yash?
Yes, sir. I do remember the class name even. I was on mute because I thought someone is going to answer.
Okay, perfect. So there is no confusion here, right? Akhil, no confusion here?
No.
Okay, so basically what I mean to say that we are using the default configuration. Sorry, let me close all this thing. User details manager. I'll go to the security config. I'm using JDBC authentication. The way the JDBC authentication will do the authentication, it will load the username. It will load the user details, and the way it is going to load the user details, because user details is an interface. User details, if I'm going to go over there, user details is an interface, but for the implementation class of this interface is user. So by default, the JDBC user details manager is going to use the user class. So if you want, you can create your own user class the way I have discussed in your course, in Spring Security course. But right now, we will be using the default user class, because JDBC user details manager, if you remember, if you'll go to this load user by username method, it's going to get you a list of user details. And obviously this user details implementation, if I do a Control T on this, is user. So that's why if you'll go to your success event, where is that? Can I close this? Where is my success event? Control Shift T.
Also,
Sorry.
in the event, whoever published the event can be considered as the source, right?
Yes.
So I see there was a method attempt authentication there. Someone was doing the dot publish event. So
yeah, that is a different thing. That I was just giving you an example. I'll show you some more thing. Okay, don't worry. That is just an example of how they're firing the event, right?
Okay, because I was thinking because that is firing the event, so that is the source. I was thinking that.
Yeah, but here the source is, I'll just tell you, there is a place where someone else is also publishing an authentication success event, right? I'll show you that. So don't worry about it for now. For now, let me just do a sign in again. If I'll come over here, so the flow will stop over here. 1 second. I'll just show you something else and we'll just wrap up. We're already running out of time. Just give me one moment, guys. Otherwise, my system will be also. My laptop is dying. All right. So I have started this application in debug, right? So let me just stop this. What is happening? Shutdown request. Just stop this application. Maybe. Okay. Now let me start it in debug mode. Right click, run as debug application, debug Spring Boot app. Okay. Those things are not that much necessary, but in order to understand why it is happening, you have to understand the framework, guys. And I have already given the videos before. You can just rewatch it if it is needed. If you want to do something by your own without any hassle, make sure that you understand how the things are happening. So let me go here, do a login again and log in with Akhil and Akhil123, do enter, and the login happened because I have just started it, right? So I have to start it in debug mode. Right click, debug. Okay, we'll just do a final thing, then I'll just wrap it up. I know it's been a long time. Okay, so now let me do a logout. And I want to log in with Akhil123, do a sign in. No, now you can see, okay, there is another breakpoint here. Do a sign in again, do no, resume again, do no. Okay, right over here, we are inside our listener. Hover over here again. So the token that you are getting is username password authentication token. I believe that this is clear. And if you'll expand this, you are getting authenticated is true, because right now already we are been authenticated, right? We already authenticated ourselves and the authentication has already been done. So the authentication variable is set to true. The authorities, whatever the authorities we has right now, the Akhil has only user authorities. The credential, I told you in my previous lecture, whenever once a successful authentication has been done, the credential is being wiped out by the Spring Security Framework. That's why you are getting null over here. And the details, this is basically the remote details, right? The IP is whatever, the session ID is whatever. Principal, by default, right now we are using the user class over here. So the principal is user. And if we'll go over here, we have all these properties set. Account is not expired, account is not logged. Authorities is whatever user, credential expired is not expired, is true, user is enabled, password is anyhow, is wiped out, and the username is Akhil, right? So we got all these things and we are able to print our event just right over here. And tomorrow we'll try to log it even further and we'll try to persist all this user information that we are getting over here. This user information, right? This user information that you are getting right over here. All this information will be persisting this information to the database, and also will make sure to persist the IP address of that particular user to our database. Okay, and accordingly we'll just think about the user lockout stuff, how we'll be just locking out the user and things like that tomorrow. So try to create a simple kind of structure just like this for today. And I have not discussed anything fancy here today. Everything is very simple. Just try to log the user and maybe tomorrow we'll just proceed further. Okay, any questions so far?
No, sir. No, sir.
All right, Akhil.
No, Vinod. Avinash, can you just show once that attempt authentication class once again, just once?
Authentication class. Okay.
I wanted to see that publish event, the success publish.
That is a different. That is not the event which is actually getting triggered. That is something. That's a event which is getting triggered. See, Akhil, Spring Security fires a lot of different events, right? A lot of different events, and I'm gonna come back to all those events right now. See, one thing you're gonna see right now. See, whenever you are firing in, let's say I'm doing a logout over here. Do logout. Let's say I'm trying to log in with Akhil and the password I'm giving something else. I'm doing login, right? It is going to some other method. It is try to load the data from the database by using the load user by username method. Let me resume it. Okay, it is right now going to the the load user by username method is internally calling this map to user method, this method to map the user by fetching the data from the database. So here I got 2 breakpoints, that's why it is calling those methods. But right now let me resume, and once I resume, you see that your authentication event, your authentication success listener, this listener did not get called. Okay, so what it is saying, this was previously there. Let me just clear this. I don't think this event will be fired in case of a bad credential. Now let me skip all my breakpoints, go over here, let me do a kill and some password, random password, do a login, bad credential, go over there, see there is nothing in the console. So only the authentication success event will be triggered when the authentication is successful. Just like that, whenever a bad credential is happening, there will be another different authentication will be triggered. When a user lockout will happen, there will be another different events will be triggered. So there are so many different events are there. If a proper authentication provider is not found, then a different authentication event will be triggered. Right, there are so many different events will be triggered. I'll be going to tell you that the different events that we have in Spring Security. But whenever you are just trying to log in with a valid password, and once that login is successful, just like this, right now only this event will be triggered and you will get this data on the screen.
Yeah, Abhilash, I think this was the event you were showing that attempt authentication was containing. I mean, the username password authentication token was having this event only. Can you
okay. So if you are okay, let me go to that username. I don't want to show that show that particular things by now, but if you're interested. Okay, not a problem. So I'll go to the processing filter. I'll go to control or do filter. Good that you are trying to dig in. That's fine. I really like that, but this is the first class. These things has no relation. Even if you don't understand this, still you are able to do all the things. Yes, you are correct. You are saying this auth result, it is firing this event, and this auth result is basically a type of authentication, and obviously this authentication will be we'll get this authentication object back from our username password authentication token, isn't it? So this is basically your username password authentication token. That's what you are saying, right?
Yes.
Correct.
But this event is not being fired, right? This interactive authentication success.
No, that event will be fired because the flow. You can put a breakpoint over here and see that whether the flow is going into this. Of course, it will go into this. See, when this particular method will be called, first of all, the flow will come to username password authentication. First of all, the flow will come to abstract authentication processing filter, right? Whenever someone gives the login credential, then it will go to the do filter. And in the do filter, we will be doing what? We'll be calling that attempt authentication method, right? The attempt authentication method is, can I go back one more time? If I'll be going to the implementation, the attempt authentication method is this one. And this method is basically inside your username password authentication filter class. And this is going to get you a authentication object. And that authentication object is a type of username password authentication token. This authenticate method is going to get you the object, the authentication object, and that object will be a username password authentication token, this particular object only. And that object will be received by the filter again, right over here, attempt authentication method. That username password authentication token only you will get over here. And right over here, if you'll go to the successful authentication method, if this is the method, if you'll be going to over here somewhere, they are setting that particular auth result. Where is that auth result? Whatever the token that they have created, that token they are setting it inside the security context folder, and also they are firing an event over here. They are publishing an event, okay? And this is this event, interactive authentication success event, and obviously they are giving that token right over here. And if you'll be going into the authentication success event, maybe you can see whatever they want to do just right here. Maybe that thing you can do for now. You can do that by yourself. You can you can just debug a little deeper if you want to. But I am going to come into this. Okay, I don't want to get the people who will be watching this particular video, I don't want them to go mad just because they don't want to, that they have not understand the internal, right? The internal is required, but up to some extent, if you want to understand it completely. If you are not understanding the internals, just try to create a listener, make it an event, print it, and maybe try digging in. Maybe you'll get to know a whole lot of different things. But I'll be telling you how basically that events are getting fired, where in which layer in the authentication provider or inside the authentication manager, where basically the events are getting fired. Also, I'm going to let you know about it. Okay.
Okay, and these two events were different. This authentication success event and one we were checking. Listener we created, right? So
yes. These are different. These are different events.
Okay,
yes. And also, whenever you'll be having a bad credential here, there is a different event will be triggered. Okay. We will learn all these things tomorrow. I don't know how much I have bored you today. So is it boring session today? I don't know. I mean, maybe I have bored you enough. It's already been 2 hours. I'm sorry about it. I just taken a little more time. But anyhow, we'll see this tomorrow. Okay. Everything is making sense so far. Willie, you are okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
All right. Okay. Cool. Felix, do you have any questions?
No, not for now.
Okay. Tomorrow we'll see everything in details. And go there and practice it. And tomorrow we'll do some exciting stuff. Hopefully you'll just practice it and come back stronger tomorrow. Okay. Bye guys. See you guys tomorrow. You can drop the call right now. Yeah, we can have a call, Akhil.